Hey everybody, welcome to Jacob's Quest, and today I want to talk about the whole Snoke and Baby Yoda midi-chlorians thing before the topic entirely shifts over to Ahsoka when the next episode drops. And everyone's been making their own videos and opinions, and everyone's kind of taking their side on this whole Snoke thing and the way they feel about not just Snoke, but the idea of the Mandalorian visiting the sequels and all this other stuff. Now, I've addressed some of this in my actual review of the episode. If you saw that, then I'm gonna reiterate some points here. But what I also want to do is I actually want to play the scene for you. So that's why I have my big logo up there. Hopefully YouTube can be cool for like 20 seconds or something. If you see a bunch of editing going on here, then you know that YouTube was not being cool. But I'm going to go ahead and play the episode now. Go ahead and play this little clip.
What the?
I thought you said this was a forward operating base.
I thought it was.
No, this isn't a military operation. This is a lab. We need to get into the system and figure out what's going on.
What about the reactor?
Do it!
I don't like this.
Pardon me.
Replicated the results of the subsequent trials, which also resulted in catastrophic failure. There were promising effects for an entire fortnight, but then, sadly, the body rejected the blood. I highly doubt we'll find a donor with a higher M count, though. I recommend that we suspend all experimentation. I fear that the volunteer will meet the same regrettable fate if we proceed with the transfusion. Unfortunately, we have exhausted our initial supply of blood. The child is small, and I was only able to harvest a limited amount without killing him. If these experiments are to continue as requested, we would again require access to the donor. I will not disappoint you again. Moff Gideon.
Okay, alright, we're gonna
Gideon is dead.
pause on that. Okay, so here, we'll go ahead and pull up the image. So this is, of course, the image that everyone wants to talk about. Get rid of the logo. So there's been a lot of different opinions on this about, is this Snoke? That's, of course, the first thing that I thought of, and a lot of other people did. And I think that that was definitely intentional. And in fact, people can even say, like, oh, you can hear some of Snoke's, like, dark side theme music. And then other people are saying, no, that's just the same theme music from episode 3. I don't know. I don't know if they're the same song or if people are just hearing different things. In any case, I think it was absolutely intentional that they wanted the audience to be reminded of Snoke. Because they know that episode 9 just came out. They know that that visual is there. And I don't think there's any way that this was an accident, that they're like, what, people are thinking about Snoke. Like, no, it was very clearly intentional, and people are even like lining up the scars on the forehead up here, stuff like that. So it's just, a lot of people are taking their sides. Other people are saying that, like, no, I don't want this related at all to the sequel trilogy. I don't want them to touch anything. I want them to pretend that doesn't exist. Other people, you know, it's either because you don't like the sequel trilogy, or it's because they just want the Mandalorian to be its own singular individual thing. And I've tweeted my opinions about all of these things in the past. But first things first, I want to talk about this, because this is like one thing that I've seen a lot of people kind of like use as in the phrasing to kind of wave everything away. If you watch the clip again that we just watched, the Dr. Pershing, he says experiments plural, and then he says the volunteer singular. He does not mention several volunteers. He doesn't even mention several test subjects or anything that would suggest that they've taken people either against their will or not and did experiments on them. He says the experiments. He, like, you know, in the context of the scene, and the way he's phrasing things, he's referring to the things that are the bodies that are floating in these little tubes here as experiments, not as volunteers, not as test subjects, but as experiments, which leads me to believe that these, just based on that context that I just explained to you, leads me to believe that these are created things. These are artificially created things. These are not people that they took and did stuff to. Okay? And they even kind of brought this up in season 1 when they had that whole thing where Quill was like, oh, I worked in the gene farms. I don't think this Baby Yoda thing was created. It looks evolved. So kind of like, oh, so, they're basically just doubling down. Like, that's a thing. They can create genetically artificial homunculus, basically. And that's what Snoke is. So that definitely, to me, leads a lot of credence to like this. Not that this specific thing we're looking at here is Snoke. Not that he will one day put on a gold robe and teach Kylo Ren or whatever. But more that this is the precursor. This is like, hey, we're trying to create things that can use the Force by taking that midichlorian blood, and we're creating our own homunculi, which, by the way, homunculi, I believe, if I'm using the term correctly, just means a fake human. Okay, it's a fake being. It's artificial. It's not real. I think it was actually like supposed to be like a living doll or something like that. There's like a whole legend of the homunculi behind it. But in any case, that's basically, I think, what we're dealing with here. We're dealing with genetically artificial beings, not humans that got messed up by experiments. I think these are the experiments. So that's definitely pointing in the direction of Snoke. Okay. Now I'm gonna say this also. I don't think this is Snoke. I think this is just a precursor to the general idea. I think that this is what I would call like laying down little seeds of lore and being like, hey, this whole thing right here, like these bodies in the tubes and this part of why they want Baby Yoda, this does not ever have to become like the main plot line or anything like that. Like I don't think the main plot of the show from this point on will be, oh, they're making Snoke and that's the plot of the whole show. I don't think that's the situation. I simply think that this is part of the equation, and it's just like a little seed to be like, hey, that's gonna be something in the universe in like 20 years or something, right? Like that. I think that's all that this was supposed to be. Okay, so I do not expect season 3 and 4 and 5 of The Mandalorian to revolve around them making Snoke like that. I don't think so at all. I think this is just part of the equation. And again, this might also tie into what a lot of other people are saying, how they think maybe Moff Gideon is just trying to give himself Force powers or give an army of people Force powers or something like that, which I think was a plot line in somewhere in Legends, where they tried to do that. And that's also possible about what's happening. Like they're creating these experiments, these artificial beings, to see if they can put Force powers in something, and if it doesn't work, then they know that it can't happen. Like that could just be like, hey, that is what we're doing. We are trying to, give non-Force users Force powers, and this is just the process of which we're doing it, and one day one of them will work and it will be Snoke. Like that could just be, maybe they're not even intentionally creating Snoke. Maybe this is just like one step along the way of what will eventually happen there. And I know a lot of other people are saying like, hey, all the Snoke stuff and the Palpatine stuff, that was all on Exegol, but it's like, this is still what, more than 20 years? This is still like 30 years, I think, before The Force Awakens starts. They have all the time in the world to move things to Exegol or move things to the unknown regions or whatever. Like that, like just because they're doing it here on this planet right now, it's like, like this base gets blown up. I'm sure these experiments are also being done elsewhere. Dr. Pershing was not in that room. He's probably somewhere else in a different lab doing similar experiments. So my thing is, I do think that this was at the very least in a maybe not even an entirely direct, tangentially, if I'm using that term correctly, related way of Snoke-esque things happening. So even if you don't want to say that this is supposed to be Snoke, or this is supposed to be, the precursor to Snoke, I do think that at the very least the science that they're using is related in a way that they very much intentionally wanted the audience to be reminded of Snoke. I think that was on purpose. So they could be doing other things. They could be trying to give Force powers or whatever else, but I don't think this whole Snoke thing that's happening now in the fandom is an accident. I think that was very much the point that they were trying to get across. The music, the way it looks, the bald, the scar, it's all very Snoke. So that's where I stand on that. Also, I find it really funny that here we are 5 years after The Force Awakens, which is crazy that it's been 5 years already. And we're back to Snoke. We went the whole roller coaster of emotions with the sequel trilogy and with Snoke specifically, about we got the insane amount of theories, and then he died and everyone's like, no, Snoke doesn't matter. And then Rise of Skywalker comes out and it's like, oh, but maybe here's the answer, just in case you did want one, he's an experiment. And some people were really disappointed by that, and now we're back again. Now we're back to okay, but maybe this is Snoke. And it's run the whole thing. It's just I want it to be a thing where 5 to 10 years from now, something else in a book or a comic happens that looks Snoke-esque, and the entire fandom explodes again saying, maybe this is Snoke. And then Steele Saunders can still sell those t-shirts that say your Snoke's theory sucks, because they will always be relevant about Snoke theories. It's kind of funny in a way that Snoke became this figure of maybe he was just created as a mystery box and they didn't have an answer and they had to kind of just make stuff up as they went along. But it's kind of funny that he's kind of taken on this life of his own in the fandom of he's almost been memeified into being oh, he's the guy that we don't know what to do with. He's endless theories of what he could be or could have been or where he could have been when, and it's just pretty funny to me. I think it's funny. Don't get me wrong, I'm interested, and there's definitely a lot of stuff about Snoke I still want to know, and I swear there's still, despite how disappointed some people might have been with the final reveal of what's up with Snoke, him being made by Palpatine, I still believe there's a great book that can be written, very Darth Plagueis-esque book of oh, here's when he showed up, here's how he took over the First Order, here's where he first met Ben, here's this and that. There's a lot of, you can tell his entire thing with him as the central character of a book. And I think it would work really well. In any case, so that's that, that part of the conversation kind of put out there. That's how I feel about it. I do think this was intentionally supposed to be a reminder of Snoke. I don't think this is ever going to become a plot line, like the main plot line. The show's not going to be centered around trying to stop the Snoke experiment or something. I don't think that's, I think this will be referenced maybe one or two other times ever in the whole show, and it's just supposed to be a little hey, here you go, Snoke fans, if you wanted a little bit of little cool thing to see, oh, look at that. I'm sure we might get more First Order stuff, and this is kind of where we get into the, there's people who don't want this to be related to the sequel trilogy at all. They want the Mandalorian to completely be standalone. They don't want to talk about the sequels. It's either because some people just don't like the sequels, which that's fine, it's a movie opinion, it's okay. And then there's other people who want the Mandalorian to be completely its own thing, and they want it to stay in its own little playground, its own little sandbox, and they don't want it to ever become too involved with the outside universe, and they want it to tell its own story. And I think I actually take more issue with that type of thinking than I do with the people who just don't like the sequels and they don't want to be mentioned. Because then at the very least with those people, I'm like, okay, you didn't like the movies, you know, that's not a crime to not like the movies. It's not, you know, there's nothing illegal about it. So it's like, okay, they're going to mention it, because you do, I think at a certain point you do have to just accept, even if you hate the movies, you have to accept that they happened and that they're canon. And so you don't have to watch them, you don't have to like them, no one's telling you you have to. But if you're going to continue to watch and absorb Star Wars material, you kind of have to go in with the expectation that, like, hey, the sequels happened. So if you're watching Star Wars material that is around that similar era or leading up to it, they're gonna mention stuff and they're gonna bring stuff up that you don't like, but it did happen and they are, you know, like, it is part of the universe. So I do that, you know, that's my kind of thing with people who like don't want this to be brought up because they didn't like the sequels. It's like, okay, but it did happen, and the Mandalorian is only, you know, the Mandalorian is the closest thing in the timeline leading up to the sequel trilogy that's happening right now. So of course they're gonna mention stuff about the First Order and Snoke and all this other, like, it's gonna happen. So don't, you know, don't get all twisted up in your little Twitter rants because they mentioned the sequels. It's like, yeah, they happened. Of course they're gonna mention the sequels. You know why? That, yeah, the High Republic comes out, they're probably gonna mention the prequels a whole lot, because it's only 200 years before the prequels, so they're probably gonna like, oh hey, here's how that thing in the prequels came to be because it happened in the High Republic. Like, that's, you know, that's how the universe connects to itself, you know. Anyways, and as to the people who want the Mandalorian to become its own thing, want it to completely stand alone, the reason I take more issue with that is because, like, why would you want that? You know, like, that's what, because that doesn't make sense to me. I understand you don't want the show itself to become you know, like oh, the Mandalorian is now solely about, I don't know, redeeming the sequels or filling in gaps for the sequels or whatever. I get that idea, right? Like, I understand, like, okay, that you don't want that to happen, but at the same time, like, the Mandalorian and him having a baby of Yoda's species and him learning more about his own Mandalorian culture, like, you know what I mean? Like, at this specific point in time, he's looking for Jedi when there are only maybe 3 or something Jedi people that he could ever meet. Of course this is going to become interconnected with the larger universe. And the other thing is that we pretty much know that this is going to result in a bunch of spin-offs for other shows, and Disney Plus is going to become pretty much the main hub of Star Wars. The movies are going to become kind of few and far between. They're not going to like spit them out like they do Marvel movies, you know? So given all of that information in your brain, you should be like, yeah, the Mandalorian is going to become part of the universe. I understand some people want the Mandalorian to stay its own thing and to stay small and to stay grounded, but that's just not the reality of the situation. I don't know, it just feels like if you want that, you need to be reading a comic or a book or something. This is a live action TV show that they're spending millions of dollars on. They're gonna want to make spin-offs, they're gonna want to have cameo appearances by fan favorite characters, they're gonna want to like drop some major names and fill in some epic lore, that because it's gonna reach the most amount of audience, you know, like they're gonna do this. I don't know. So it's strange to me when I see people getting all bummed out because they're like, I want the Mandalorian to stay tiny and to stay on Navarro all the time. And I'm like, even and if anything, this episode should show you, even if they stay on Navarro, hey look, there's Snoke stuff now, you know? So it's like, the Mandalorian I don't think was ever intended to be this really small thing. Now I do, you know, it is an episodic, it's mainly an episodic adventure story that has like this overarching plot, but that overarching plot is going to connect to the other galactic wide plot of the Skywalker saga and all that stuff that happened. So I don't know. It's strange to me when I see people say like, I want it to stay small, because whenever I'm reading a Star Wars book or a comic, I want it to like, hey, give me something giant that can connect to everything else. That's what I want. So I don't know. Maybe I'm just looking for different things in my Star Wars stories. Like I want my Star Wars stories to connect to each other and to like, you know, basically like, hey, this matters because it's all connected. The Clone Wars matters because of all the stuff that happened there and then happened in Rebels, and it's gonna happen in this show, and it's all connected to each other. You know, and if we can, because that was, if anything, that was my big frustration with some of the movies, is that, you know, we'd be watching Clone Wars and Rebels and all this stuff, and then the movies never mention any of this stuff, and so there's always been like this big separation between the shows and the movies. So if we can use the Mandalorian as the middle ground, the middleman between those two things, of like, hey, Rebels and Clone Wars matter because it's all in Mandalorian, and then the stuff in Mandalorian affects the stuff in the movies and how this all makes sense. You know, like, yes, connect it all, attach it. That's what I want. So anyways, that's my stance on that. So the whole sequels are a thing. Okay, they're not going anywhere. They happened. You don't have to like them. You don't have to watch them. You don't have to buy the merchandise. But it is pointless to get angry on Twitter and on YouTube, you know, for the next decade that the sequels happened, because you're just gonna wear yourself out at some point, and you're just gonna look very silly because they happened, man. You just gotta get over it. You know, if you don't want to watch anything about the sequels, then you need to stop watching anything that is around that time period, which includes The Mandalorian, because it's gonna happen. It's right there. There's very clear bridgeways that they're setting up, I think, that season 5, 6 of The Mandalorian, whatever. It's like, hey, we might see a full-on First Order symbol at some point. So we'll see like one officer in the background wearing a First Order logo on his shoulder or something. They're like, whoa, there it is, First Order. You know, something like that. So, in any case, I'm kind of rambling at this point, but basically, I'm excited that this is, at the very least, a small, tiny seed hinting at Snoke-esque stuff. Not that this is necessarily Snoke, but this is like hinting in that direction, and I'm really happy about that. And yeah, just overall, I think we gotta be prepared for the Mandalorian to be the middleman between the animated shows that, you know, at least to the mainstream public, were typically ignored, basically. Like, you know, your more mainstream fans of Star Wars who only watch the movies, they pretty much ignore the TV shows. I have family who like watch the movies and all this stuff, and they even watch The Mandalorian, but I know they've never seen those shows. So, you know, if this can be the middleman between, like, hey, that stuff did matter. You know, we didn't put that out for no reason. We didn't, like all of those characters are going to end up mattering. Those plot lines, especially around Mandalore and Bo-Katan and all that stuff, those are still going to get picked up. And it's all going to also tie into the sequel trilogy and all those big budget movies that you saw and you only watched the movies. You know, it's like, that's the dream, ultimately, is to have everything feel like it is part of it, you know, to feel like it's not just this thing that can be kind of thrown away and whatever. So anyways, that's my stance on that. I know I'm kind of rambling. I'm just kind of going on. In any case, let me know what you think about Snoke stuff. Let me know what you think about the sequel trilogy in the Mandalorian show in general. And let me know what you think about, you know, just basically the Star Wars franchise connecting to itself. The movies, the shows, the comics, the Mandalorian, the animated series, all that stuff tying into each other. Let me know your opinions on that. And I'll see you guys on the next episode. Bye.